Hello, it's good to be back again, especially the week before Christmas. Isn't that lovely? Now, what I thought I'd do today was just to go back to Christmases past, because we forget Christmases and how times have changed. One of the big things that I remember particularly is the decorations. As a child, and I'm going back before the Second World War, we didn't have all these magnificent decorations, and of course the poverty, we just don't appreciate the poverty that went on before the war. I can remember going into Cumbria, I think I've told you before, and seeing children barefooted. I mean, can you imagine the poverty that children can't afford to have socks and shoes? But that was the level of poverty that was there, and people accepted it. I got a scholarship to Clapham College, and because my family had no money, and I got a scholarship, and I remember that all the boys, because this was a fee-paying college in those days, and I remember all the boys going in having a lunch, a cooked lunch, the ones who were, their parents paid for them, whereas I used to take, and a few other scholarship boys like myself, we used to take sandwiches, and we had to sit in the shelter. They had like a bus shelter to protect from the rain. We used to sit in there and watch all these others going into the nice warm dining room and having a meal, and we'd sit out there and eat our sandwiches. But we accepted it. This is the strange thing about it. And of course, before the war, we forget that although there was a lot of poverty, people had servants. It's incredible, just ordinary people. And so, the man who lived next door to us in London, he had a housekeeper, and another bit further up the road, they had 2 or 3 maids. But of course, all that went with the war, because obviously, before the war, there was poverty, as I was saying, and people just didn't have the money, so they went out and they did whatever work they could. I think I've mentioned to you before how you'd have 10 people a day knocking at the door. They want to clean your windows, or sharpen your knives, or dig the garden, or sweep the front, or do anything. If you didn't have money in those days, nowadays everybody just goes and gets benefits. But in those days, if you didn't have money, you went out and you did something for it. I think I may have told you before, I can't remember, but when we were at Seaford, this is many years ago, this is after the war, we had a housekeeper. And this housekeeper, she didn't know what poverty was really, and I remember that, and they didn't know what crime was, and she was the one. We had about a dozen ducks, and one day all the ducks vanished, and I thought, where are all the ducks gone to? And of course, the milkman actually told me. He said, your housekeeper, she sold them all off to a friend. And this made me get hold of her and say, well, because she had a baby, who lived with her, because we always tried to help people. And I brought up a very large family, and this is why we had a housekeeper and help with the house. But I discovered that she had this baby, and I thought, well, she ought to be getting some support from the father. So I took her down to see my solicitor. I thought, well, it'll be a help for her. And he investigated, he called me up afterwards, he said, well, you can't really help her because she was living as a prostitute in London, and so she doesn't know the father could be any one of 200 men. So these are all the things where poverty comes in, which we've just lost it today. We take it all for granted. But going back to Christmas before the war, I can remember, we've got all the decorations up and what's it, but in those days before the war, one made paper chains, and time before Christmas you couldn't go out and buy decorations. You had these packets of strips of paper, and you'd sit there for hours making up paper chains which you'd string up, but it was fun, this was what it was all about. Also, there weren't cars about, and of course there's no television, and the milkman used to come down the road with his horse and cart, and the horse would know where to stop outside the different houses. But of course that wouldn't be possible today because you've just got a continuous line of cars. But there weren't the cars, there'd be the odd car here or there, but that was all. But times have changed so much, we just don't realise how times have changed. Because there wasn't television, and because the wireless was there, but it was only the sort of the people with wealth or people had it. I had a crystal set myself as a boy, and I mean, can you imagine sitting with a crystal set? But amazing, because all you needed for a crystal set, you didn't need any power. There's no batteries, nothing. This is why we could afford it. All you needed was a long aerial and an earth, something stuck into the ground. And then you had this little crystal, and it had a little piece of wire, and you had to negotiate this piece of wire over the crystal. It sounds absolutely incredible today. In fact, I wonder how many of you ever even remember it or knew about it. And you manoeuvred this little piece of wire over the crystal, and till you found a place where you actually got reception, and then you'd hear your radio set on a pair of earphones, I might add, not. And we take it all for granted today. And of course, churches, we wonder why. I look at the films now. Every day I look at, there's a Christmas television station, and I look at all the films. And do you know, of every 10 films I watch, there is no mention of the child Jesus or the true meaning of Christmas. It's all Santa Claus. Every one of them is Santa Claus. And yet, where has Christ gone? Yet before the war, it was the churches were the centre of our lives. Today's churches are empty. We don't realise it's really, I suppose, because of television. Whereas today people sit and look at television and glued to their television sets and watch the different programmes. In those days there wasn't any television. So what did you do? You had the church as a centre, and they'd have whist drives, perhaps twice a week. People would go and play whist. There'd be youth clubs, there'd be the guides, there'd be the scouts. There was plenty of things for people to do. The churches were like a centre, and this is why they were full, of course, because if you went every evening or every other evening to something in the church hall, you had to go on a Sunday, it was part of your life. And people don't realise this is one of the reasons why churches are empty today, unfortunately. It's not just because of people are more aware of what is going on. It's because it's just not there, unfortunately. But one remembers these things, and I can remember going to the local co-op, and one of the big things of Christmas was to go and see Father Christmas. But it wasn't just to go and see him sitting on a chair as they do it today. No, practically every store had, particularly the co-op stores, they used to have a Christmas ride, and they used to change it every year, although it was the same ride. You'd go into this like a little room or a compartment, and the thing would shake, and you'd see things going by the windows. And so one year it would be a sleigh ride to see Father Christmas, another year it might be an aeroplane ride. Every year it was something different, but it made Christmas a big event. And I suppose today it's a different aspect of it. But those of you who are old enough to remember before the war, it's amazing to see the changes. And is it for the better? I think it is. It's wonderful what we have today. And unfortunately, I've got to go up to Blackpool this week, and so I've got to cut it short. But memories of Christmas are things which I think we all have, and if we be thankful today that we've got so much, and I mean to think of life without television, very little radio, having to go out and communicate using the churches, and of course people and the shops were very much more active in those days because they didn't have supermarkets. This is another thing which has come about which we forget. Before the war, you had your little groups of shops, and you always had your baker's shop, because the bread wouldn't keep. If you had bread the next day, it went stale. What do they put in bread now that stops it from going off? Who knows? But something stops it from going off. I've got bread in my kitchen today, which I bought a week ago. It's still edible and nice, whereas before the war, if you had a loaf and you left it over the next day or the day after, it would be as hard as nails. It would have gone stale, possibly going a bit mouldy. And we forget that before the war, people didn't have refrigerators. Everybody had a larder. And in the larder there was this little piece of galvanized tin with holes in it, so it let the fresh air in it, and you put your stuff into there, and I suppose it kept it cool, but everything went off. And this is something which we don't think about. You had this little group of shops near in every community. You'd have your baker, because the bread was baked every day, so obviously they had to have a baker's shop there. You had the butcher, and the butcher, you had all the meat was killed. You'd have the rabbits hanging up. You can't imagine. And chickens. Today I went to Iceland the other day, and I bought 2 chicken breasts for £1. Before the war, to buy a chicken was a great treat. We used to have a chicken once a year for Christmas, for our Christmas dinner. That was a great treat. How times have changed, and it's these things which come back to you now at Christmas time, and we just be thankful. But as I was talking about the group of shops by every little community, you had your baker's shop, you had the butcher's shop, you had a fish shop, because once again fish was and it was delivered and caught and brought. They had the big fish markets in London, and people used to go up from all the surrounding areas and pick up the fish. So it was meat, fish, and there was always a sweet shop, because obviously the children wanted their sweets. But they were the main things, and you'd walk past the bakers and you'd smell that lovely smell of fresh bread being cooked. We've lost all of that today. We go into the supermarket. But I went to Canada after the war, and I saw they had supermarkets there, and I went around them and I thought, well gosh, we've got nothing like this in England, but I bet it'll come and blow me down. It has. And on that happy note, I'm going to wish you goodbye, and it's only another week for Christmas, so I'm hoping I'll do one more before Christmas and be able to wish you a happy Christmas. But get ready for it. It's a lovely time of the year. The joy in your heart, the joy which you can spread, and the happiness you can spread. Goodbye, and a happy Christmas in advance. Goodbye, and God bless you.